I've invited what I consider to be Sacramento's premier FHA appraiser, Ryan Lundquist, and Ryan has been around the block many times, and he totally knows what's going on. He's FHA certified, so he was kind enough to join us on the show today to help us kind of decipher and understand the difference in a typical loan transaction where the appraiser goes out versus FHA. And we're going to focus on FHA today because it's just really common. Ryan, are you on the line?
I'm here, Tamara. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I know you're real busy.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate you having me today. So that's great.
You are my FHA expert, I can tell you that. And not only that, but just so listeners know, you do all sorts of appraisals. But we want to focus on FHA. So tell the listeners, if you would, Ryan, what exactly differentiates an FHA loan via appraisal, and why is it important?
Well, first, as you said, FHA, really dominates the local market. So it's important to understand what set of requirements there are for FHA loans. And basically, FHA has a set of property requirements, and they state that if FHA is going to guarantee a loan, then it has to meet this certain criteria. And the criteria is more strict than conventional financing or other types of financing typically. And basically what FHA is looking for is soundness, security, safety, making sure that everything in the property works properly. It's almost like if you hired a 12-year-old and said, now go inspect this property. You may not know how things work, but I just want to make sure that you test everything and make sure that everything does work. So if there's an appliance that's supposed to, a space for an appliance, the appliance should be there. You turn on the AC unit, the wall heater, whatever you have going on, then those things should work. There shouldn't be any, things like chip and paint, which could be a safety hazard if there's lead-based paint. The house was built before 1978, lead-based paint was used. And so on and so on. And so any little things, like a missing fixture, that, there's dangling wire. FHA doesn't like that because they don't want their people to be electrocuted.
Right.
So,
well, and let's go back just one step here, and you use the analogy of a 12-year-old, which I think is a really good analogy. But at the same time, I would even add to that to tell a 12-year-old to go in there, test everything, and see how much trouble you can get yourself into. If there's a missing board in the fence and the neighbor has a pool, could you hurt yourself? And so it's kind of, it's not as simple as a 12-year-old, because obviously I know the requirements and the education that you have to go through, and I don't think a 12-year-old could pass all the tests and certifications.
Well,
but that's the idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the idea of a 12-year-old is that, you may not know how things work, but really you can understand the concept of, if I flip this light switch on, it's got to be there.
Right.
If I turn on the water, then there should be hot water that comes out. If I flush the toilet should flush. And obviously there's more complex things. But basically FHA is really looking out for the health and safety of its occupants. And, some of the things that I find that most commonly don't pass FHA are really basic things. I know, a loan like this can really scare away buyers sometimes because they think, well, how am I going to find a property like that? But it's really okay if there's deferred maintenance. Paint doesn't have to be perfect on the inside. There can be minor tears and carpet stains and such, but the little fixes where there's not a carbon monoxide detector installed and local code or state code says that there needs to be, or there's, missing smoke alarms. Those things cost so little. A toilet doesn't flush. That's an easy fix. A hot water heater's not strapped, or there's a, doggy door that someone decided to install in between the garage and in the dining area, and that compromises the firewall of the house, and so chances are that door is going to need to be replaced. And so
absolutely. And I've asked you about this one before, Ryan, but it's one that, and I always, when I'm showing property, I always make a joke about it to my clients, and that is the requirement for a stove, but not a requirement for a refrigerator. And so it's like our food can go rotten as long as we can cook it. And do you have any understanding or explanation of that?
Yeah, well, I don't know why FHA would not say a fridge is not required per se, but I do know that that's considered personal property. On the appraisal report, they ask FHA appraisers to, if there's a fridge there. just put a little P there to say this is personal property. But really what their requirement says for a stove, it's interesting because they actually don't require a drop-in stove, a stove that slides in, standalone stove. And so if one's missing, it's not required, but the lender is probably going to require it nonetheless. What FHA would require is that if a stove actually drops in to the countertop and then that's missing,
that it works.
That absolutely has to be there and has to be working. So that's kind of the
clear on that, because that's a huge thing, Ryan. When I'm out showing property, it's a huge thing that if it doesn't have a stove, I just automatically assume that it's not going to go FHA. And so what you're saying is from your perspective, if it's not a built-in, if it's a slide-in, and it's not, then it's not going to be, you're not going to be the appraiser that's going to call it and say, oh, this needs a stove. It could be the lender. I understand that. But you're saying that from your perspective as a certified FHA appraiser, you're not going to call it?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't call that because it's not a requirement, but every time the lender wants me to go back out and reinspect the property to make sure that there's been a stove installed. I mean, that's really their supplemental standard in what they want, and it's above and beyond FHA. But and I should say too, whenever there's an FHA appraisal, usually there's going to be some sort of minor issue called out, and maybe a few $100s has to be spent. Maybe a little bit more if there's a missing AC unit that got stolen on an REO property, and so usually the appraiser has to go back out. And those items are solved before the close of escrow somehow. So maybe the buyer will pay, maybe the seller will pay. Just having a good realtor to really negotiate that, I think, is key, because there's probably going to be some repairs. And again, it's not something that people need to freak out about, but just to understand that appraisers really go through and look at a large set of criteria to determine will this property meet minimum property requirements for FHA. So there's a lot to look at.
And you're right, because in this market, I am not beyond. I have gone and done more repairs. I had my husband, because FHA called it, because it was there was a fence missing a slat, which is normally not a big deal, as you know, but on the other side was a built-in swimming pool. And that presents a health and safety hazard. And so the appraiser called it, and I was out there in the rain last winter, I think it was, nailing up a fence board because a lot of these properties now are REOs. I've had my husband go over and replace a GFI. I mean, a lot of these properties are REOs, and by the time that the bank gets, approves it and says they'll fix it or they'll do a repair, I mean, the loan lock could in. So it's a crazy market. And like you said, it's not up to you, or it's not any of your concern how it gets fixed. You call what you're going to call per your requirements. And when you get the phone call that says, can you go out and reinspect, then you're going to go out and make sure that stuff's checked off.
Absolutely, and hey, kudos to you for being proactive about that. I think that's a really good sign. Very helpful. Just kind of help the loan go through instead of waiting on the banks, because sometimes they do take long to make very simple repairs that are $20 or something, or $2 for
I'm not going to have my buyers lose a house because a light switch is broken. I mean, hello. Silly stuff like that I understand. I understand, you're very effective and efficient in what you do. I know that. But I wouldn't let something like that stop it. Yet you have to meet your requirements, and you've got to call it. If there's something that seems silly to me, like, a broken window, no big deal. But at the same time, boy, that's a big deal for FHA.
Yeah, definitely, and it's just a matter of just figuring out how to solve the issue. Like, I have one on my desk right now, and normally I wouldn't call a ceiling fan if it has a tiny little wobble, but this ceiling fan was like a roller coaster, and no one in their right mind is going to put their baby in a crib underneath it, because the thing looks like it's going to fall. So it's a safety hazard, but it's an easy fix. It's an older house, 50 years old, and they can buy an $8 light fixture and take off the ceiling fan. It's so simple to fix. So many people can do that. It's not a problem at all.
Well, I want to give a shout out to homeowners out there, people who are thinking of selling, because, we talked about FHA, and that was the purpose this morning of our segment, but I just really want to point out, I have recommended, Ryan, to some of my homeowners who are not in the short sale situation, who are equity sellers, and let's face it, in this market, you have got to price your home properly, and in my opinion, the best way to do that is to hire an appraiser like Ryan who can go out and do an evaluation on the property and so you know how to price your home. I have 2 listings right now, and I'm trying to talk them into using an appraiser like you so that they can get a good idea because they're really off on their price. So it can be a realtor's best friend to say, hey, Ryan, you want to do an appraisal on this house? Because then I'm not the bad guy saying your house is only worth $350,000 versus the $500 you think it's worth. And so do you want to speak just on a moment about that and how you service the Sacramento area?
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I always appreciate your referrals. And yeah, I do provide appraisals for situations like that. If a homeowner just needs to understand, what is my house really worth? How should I market it? They need to understand research in the market. I do a ton of work with property tax appeals, and that really heats up between July and November. I do, estate appraisals when someone dies, called a date of death appraisal, appraisals for divorce, and just really try to diversify and serve people in a number of life circumstances.
Awesome. So tell people 2 things as we move on here. Tell people how they can get a hold of you via phone number, and then I want you to do me a favor and post your blog, your website on my wall so that people can go, people who are thinking of selling or thinking of, hiring an appraiser can go and actually see it on my wall.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much. I'll do that. My phone number is 916-595-3735, and I'm at sacramentoappraisalblog.com.
Awesome. Ryan, thanks for being on the show. We're going to have you back again real soon.
Thanks, Tamara. You're the best. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Have a good day. I appreciate you too.